whenever you're jumping on here. I'm going to talk today about the first. I'll make a couple announcements. I just announced and I'm starting a Twitch. So I have a Twitch account at the same handle at Hidden Hockey. If you're on Twitch, feel free to watch, and if you're new, feel free to jump in on these live streams. I'll be doing more of the live streams on there just to see, and then I'm also still doing my YouTube live streams as well. But now I got a couple different audiences, so hopefully we'll see some traction that way as well. Another thing that I'm going to get into with that is, keep spreading the word out for this channel. We've gotten to 200 subscribers. Really appreciate those that have gone on and have been able to be on the channel. Keep spreading it out to those that are interested, and, I greatly appreciate you guys being on here. It's great to be able to have more people on here and be able to do more content pieces as well. So going into this now, we're going to talk about today the 2025 NHL Central Scouting midseason rankings that were just released yesterday. So starting off with some North American guys, you look at the list here, you got number 1 overall. For the North American sides, this made a change. Originally it was James Higgins, who's now number 2 in the most recent rankings. He was number 1 and unanimous number 1 for the last 18 months. But now Matthew Schaefer, the defenseman, has taken over for Erie, following a pretty good World Junior Championships where he was unfortunately not able to play the full amount due to injury. Very curious to see what happens with him and different things like that. I don't necessarily agree that Schaefer should be 1 right now. I don't think he's played enough and had enough of a pedigree, in my opinion, to warrant him being number 1. And then obviously going to James Higgins. I think James Higgins had a really good World Junior Championship. I thought he was super dominant for a U.S. team that won the gold. He's given me no reason to believe that he isn't the number 1 overall pick. He's got similar projection to Macklin Celebrini, who was also number 1 overall pick. Should be really interesting to see what he's able to do and the different things going on. Cal, hey, what's up, buddy? You didn't say any on here. Appreciate you being on here, Cal. I think James Higgins to me is still the unanimous 1, but should be very curious to see what he's able to do for the remainder of the year. I think he's got maybe some more to prove in some international scouts' eyes and different people. But there's a lot to like there. Again, like I said, I've compared him consistently to a prime Patrick Kane. I believe his upside is of that ability, and I'm curious to see where he's able to go from here. I think there's a lot to like with him. Going into number 3 here, Michael Misa. Michael Misa this is probably a pretty appropriate rank for him. I have him at 2 myself. And then obviously, I just think he's a really good player as well. He hasn't really dominated as well as he could have in the earlier parts of his year, but he's really he's over 2 points a game in the OHL. Really seeming to find his game and really seeming to give people a reason as to why he got the exceptional status after his wonderful OHL Cup when he was 15. Going on here, some other names on here, Port Martone I thought was, appropriately ranked. I think the top 5 here is pretty solid. I would have a mixture of these 5 as the top 5 North American players. The first player that I really want to get into that I think, I think this is just a classic thing of scouts being scouts. Radim Mertka here at 6. He's a 6'6" defenseman, 207, and anytime a scout sees anybody who's 6'6" or plus, and they're able to skate, all of a sudden it's a massive boon for them. They think, oh my God, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and scouts don't learn their lessons, obviously, because this keeps happening. Nobody knew who Radim Mertka was before 18 months ago. And even then, there weren't a lot of people who knew who he was even before that as well. We're looking at a guy here who is still very raw. I look at him like a Logan Stanley. Logan Stanley was, in my opinion, not worth a first-round pick. Radim Mertka is of that same ilk. I just don't think the skill is there. I don't think the offensive production will ever be there. I think he's just another big guy who gets overrated because he's 6'6" and can skate. That should, in my opinion, his production is going to lead to where he should be appropriately ranked is probably in the 3rd round. But because of the size queen, emphasis and the NHL being obsessed with guys that are 6'6" plus and above, leads to him being ranked as aggressively as he is on here. I don't see the talent. I don't see the ability. I've watched him. I've tried to find good things in his game. I think he's not a bad player. I just think he's not a first-round quality player. Caleb Denoyers is another guy who's really solid. I have him right around – he's probably going to fit right around 10, and that's where I have him ranked in my personal mock. Some other guys, I'm just going to go through, the rest of the top 10, and then I'm going to get into different players that I was surprised to see them either ranked too high or too low. So going into number 8 here, Jake O'Brien. This is a big leap for him. I see him as a guy who could be a second-round pick. I was very curious to see what he was able to do and how he was able to manage, his season so far. I think he's really done a great job in his draft year. He's been super impressive in the way he's handled his business. He's gone about his play really well. And it's really exciting to see what he's able to do going into the rest of this season here. I think he's done a really good job for his draft status, and the guy is going to become a big riser. Jackson Smith's another guy I'm super high on as well. I have him personally ranked at 12. Central Scouting seems to agree. They have him ranked as the second highest or the third highest ranked defenseman in this North American class. Personally, he is my 1. He's my 2 right now. Schaefer, and then I have Smith as my 2nd. It should be interesting to see what he's able to do and what his game is going forward here. And then Logan Hensler is another guy who I would say is, again, being overrated based on his ability. Yes, he can skate the puck, and then that's it. He doesn't have the offensive game-breaking ability that these other defensemen have. To me, I don't think is a first-round pick. I don't see the production. I don't see the explosiveness. I see a very safe floor for him. He's going to be somewhere in that third pairing realm. That's where I see his upside ultimately, and it's a shame because he's a really good skater. I think he's got a lot of good potential, but he just doesn't exhibit it right now, and he may never. But that's why he's going to college. That's why he's in a great program in Wisconsin. They've been known to develop really good defensemen. Should be really interesting to see where we go from here. I'm going to interrupt here real quick because we got a quick question from Cal. Cal says, why do scouts keep making the same mistake on Big D-Men even after they've been proven wrong so much recently? Isn't it kind of like getting a lottery ticket? Good question, Cal. Like I said, I think the big thing for me – actually, I'm going to leave it up here. The big question for me with that is I would like to ask a scout the same thing, right? Another guy who's a really good example of this is a guy who a lot of people don't know is Milan Jurčina. Another Slovakian defenseman, went over to play North American Junior, just like Radim Mrka is doing. I don't think he had more than 12 or 13 points in the National Hockey League in 100 games. People got obsessed because he was 6'7" and 230 pounds, and you want to throw a body check. So it's interesting to see. I'm gonna make a smaller video on this as well. But it's just that same mistake is happening a lot. And I think it's just because seeing people at that size, I think scouts get, overly excited about it, and it's fine. But I think they feel like they're missing a commodity by not taking these guys in the first round. And really they should be second or third round picks. So thanks for the question, Cal. That was, a great question and actually a fair question as well. Going into the rest of the guys here, another guy I want to highlight here in this list is Malcolm Spence. Malcolm Spence to me he's a bona fide top 10 pick. Very safe player, kind of a player that the Wings would take. Traditionally a really good, 200-foot player, good offensive ability, good defensively, really responsible on all ends. Finds a lot of really good opportunities to make himself really productive on the ice. Just an ultimate coach's player, a great character kid, a ton of personality. He just screams Red Wings pick. So, will he fall to the Wings based on how we're playing lately? I would say I'm not sure. Talking from a fan's perspective, but I think he's, to me, a bona fide top 10 pick. I think his floor is a little bit lower just because of, I don't think people see the high ceiling with him. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think he's a guy who could put up 30 or 40 goals in the National Hockey League. It just depends on the line mates he gets and the people that are surrounded around him. But it should be really interesting to see what he's able to do and how he's able to play going forward. And that'll ultimately determine what he's able to do, especially when he plays in the playoffs this year with a strong team, having Matt Schaefer as his teammate. They got a really good team there in Erie. So if he makes a deep playoff run, he's a really important factor in that playoff run. and maybe makes a Memorial Cup run, I think that's going to do wonders for his stock. And then we go into some other guys I want to mention as well. Another guy who I think is just ranked far, far too low is I'm going to mention him here at 34, Cole Reshney. Cole Reshney is a guy who's a super gifted player, great skating ability, unbelievable shot, but unfortunately the kid's 5'10". So as a result, the size factor comes into play. Is he going to project the way that you would like him to? Is there an ability for him to be a really effective player at the pro level? Is he going to be an immediate impact guy? I wouldn't say that he will be, but it's hard not to bet on the upside. You look at a guy like Braden Point, very similar players in the fact that they both scored a lot at the Western Hockey League level. Both had really good skating ability. Both were great, great shooters of the puck. Everybody was scared off by the size, though. Cole Reshney to me is a guy who I have him actually really aggressively ranked. I have him at 4 in my mock draft, but he's ranked here at 34 for North American skating. He's the biggest surprise for me because that's a second-round grade coming from Central Scouting. I don't see that grading at all. I think there's a ton of upside with him. There's a really good skill set. I think he's got one of the better shots of the draft. There's just too much upside there for me not to think that he will be a really successful National Hockey League player. Another guy I'm going to highlight here as well is Aiden Lane. So Aiden Lane is a little bit lower here on the draft board. Let me go down here. Aiden Lane here at 114 for North American rank. For me, Aiden Lane is a guy who, he's up until recently he's only played, Canada prep school hockey, playing for the really illustrious program of the St. Andrews College. Should be really interesting what he's able to do as well. He's just now moved into the USHL level, playing for the Green Bay Gamblers. So far not productive, but a lot of people needed time and adjustment. His teammate from last year, Dean Letourneau, made the same jump last year and is now going on to play D1 hockey this year. Struggling a little bit at the D1 level, but was another kid who really did well at St. Andrews College, moved up into higher levels, and then was seen as a first-round pick. I don't think first-round pick is necessarily where I see Aiden Lane, but I do see him anywhere from 40 to 60. I think he's a really solid player. For him to be ranked as low as he is on North American Central Scouting, this is a ultimate sleeper pick. Really interesting to see what he's able to come up with and how he's able to play the game here. In the next, coming bit of the season. So I'm going to go ahead and list my sleepers here as well. So obviously I talked about Cole Reshney. I talked about Malcolm Spence. Another guy I want to mention is LJ Mooney. LJ Mooney was ranked in basically the lower end of this ranking here. And a lot of people are scratching their heads. This is 208 in North America. This is a kid. He's purely ranked here because of his size. You look at his talent level, he, to me, is a top 15 pick in this draft, no question. The hard thing you got to get around, though, is that he's 5'7" and 150 pounds. Having watched this kid for a few years now, he's Logan Cooley's cousin. He's played with really high-end players. He's played with pro players in the summer the last few years. Everybody talks about how great of a kid this kid is. Everybody talks about his hands, his elusiveness, his way to get around his ability to get around the zone and find ways and opportunities. And every time I watch him play, I look at him as a faster Brian Giunta. Brian Giunta was drafted in the 3rd round. Do I think that's where LJ Mooney will be? I think his upside is even better than what Brian Giunta's was back in the day. And Brian Giunta went relatively, slept on because of his size. Nobody really looked at him seriously. They said, yeah, he's a really good scorer, but can he produce at the pro level? A lot of people didn't seem to think that he would. But LJ Mooney, to me, is a guy who is absolutely far and away the most outwardly bad ranked player here. I think it's not even remotely close. This has him obviously being at 208 in North America, which basically makes him a camp invite. People, they don't even see him as a draft eligible guy. I have him personally. I think he's going to be a 2nd-round pick. The skill is too hard to pass up on. I don't care that he's 5'7". You look at Max Swanson. Max Swanson last year is same size, left to be at the end of the draft board. And you look at him this year, and he's done a really good job playing for, I believe he's still playing in Fargo. But in the USHL. But he did an unbelievable job at the Fargo Force in the playoff run last year. Super good player as well. These young kids, yes, they may be small, but you can't sleep on the size. You can't sleep on him just because of size. He's got a great skating ability. I think he's one of the faster skaters in this draft. I think there's some production issues for sure. That's why I wouldn't have him in my first round, but I'd rather take a chance on this kid than I would a 6'7" behemoth that doesn't produce at all. So let's, rationale needs to come into play a little bit here for some of these scouts. And you can see why a lot of these shorter guys are sleepers. To that effect, I'm going to talk about Adam Banach, playing in the USHL level. He really struggled at the pro level last year in the Czech league as a 17-year-old. He comes into the USHL this year, is averaging over a point per game for Youngstown. Another guy who I think is a really good player, super impressive ability. He's to me a first-round grade in my opinion. He's ranked in North America in the 60s. Let me scroll up here to get back to him. You look at him, he's 5'7" and a quarter and 160 pounds. Again, a really small player, a guy who's going to get, dropped lower in the draft just because of his size. This is a kid, again, with first-round skill, great ability. He's dominated Ivan Helenka for 2 years now. Obviously doing well at the USHL level. The translatability to the pros, though, has been a struggle for him. He's very much a wait-and-see project, but he's a worthwhile project just because he's so elusive. He's a great playmaker, one of the better passers in the draft. There's a ton to really like with Adam Banach, and a bunch that, there's a lot of interesting things to see with him. I think there's just such an ability and such an upside with him. I just think he's a really underrated player in this draft as well. Some other guys I'm going to mention here. I have some of my notes off to the side, guys. So if you're wondering why I'm looking off to the side, that's why. Some other players I want to mention. Michael Eriksson, he's a Norwegian player. Norway, again, is going to have a really strong draft as well. A few different players that may be drafted. One that went unranked in this ranking is Elias Strome-Vatne, who's an 06 born playing for Färjestad. Michael Eriksson is his teammate. Michael Eriksson has now played in Sweden for a couple years for Färjestad, is averaging over a point per game at the J20 level, the under 20 level in Sweden. And he's been a really impressive player. I think, again, he's finding himself to be a little bit, shorter in terms of like where he is ranked and different things like that. I think there's just a lot to really like with a player like Michael Eriksson. To me, he's very projectable at the pro level. Has adjusted really well to a really superior development system in Sweden. There's just a ton to really like with his game, and I think there's more to his game than a lot of people realize. Same thing with Mattias van Haven. A lot of people perceive the Finnish class this year to be a really weak class of prospects. I think Mattias van Haven is one of the top offerings in this Finnish class. I think he's on the edge of being a first rounder, closer to a second rounder. Another kid with high-end skill, doing really well at the under 20 level, one of the leading scorers at the under 20 league. As a 17-year-old in the U20 Sim Liga. Again, another kid with great skill, not the best skater, but he's really talented offensively. If you could work with him on his skating, I think that would improve his game tremendously. Just another kid with a lot to like in his game and a lot of good skill as well. A defenseman here that I'm going to talk about now is Anthony Alain Samake. He's a USHL player, ranked in here. Let me find out where he was exactly ranked. But he's another kid, really good skill, great ability, just finds ways to get around pucks. So he's ranked 75 in North America. A little bit shorter, but a superior skater. I've gotten a couple of really good viewings on this kid. A breakout machine. Doesn't necessarily bring the offensive game, but he's really good at transporting pucks. Finds his opportunities every way he can to make himself effective. He's really good defensively, closes gaps super well, a really great stick as well. I think he's very much a sleeper find. And then finally, one other guy I'm going to mention as a sleeper is Mikhail Melikov. A lot of people, they looked at the Yegor Chinnikov pick a couple years ago as like a big shock. I had him in my first round. I have similar feelings on Mikhail Melikov. I think he's a guy who has been undervalued a little bit because of the war. I think, in Russia, there's some really good talented players, but some players, I think that MHL has been diminished a little bit and really isn't thought of as highly as it maybe could be. And this is a kid who's averaging as a 17-year-old over a point per game in Russia's top junior league. He's getting some opportunities to really make himself a warranted player. He's a guy who I think you have to seriously watch out for. If anything, he should be a mid-round pick. Right now, he is, again, I think criminally underrated. In North America, or in the international rank, he's ranked at 117 for international rank. So they have him closer to like a 6th, 7th round pick. I think there's a lot to like with Mikhail Melikov, and there's just a ton of ability within that player as well. And then going into a couple of overagers I want to mention as well. Two guys I think that were really interesting are Aiden Park, who plays for Green Bay, and his teammates with a couple players in this draft class. He's been, top 5 in the USHL in scoring, been a really impressive player in his own right, has done really well. He's committed to the University of Michigan next year. He's a guy who I think should get some draft attention. And then another guy I'm going to mention here, I'm going to share the tab for the international rank as well, so you guys can see that. But I'm going to scroll down here to number 41, Benjamin Reutinen. I've done a video on him in terms of he was one of the best undrafted prospects in the 24 draft, in my opinion. He's an overager this year. He's actually a double overager, which rarely those are drafted. They have to obviously be really impressive in order to be drafted, and he's done a great job here for Topera at the Liga level. He's averaging over a half a point per game as a 20-year-old, playing on the top line sometimes within the pro games there. Also played at the World Juniors as well this year, was invited to Team Finland, was on their top line with some of their really good players. He had 4 points in 7 games. I thought he acquitted himself really well and got a lot of notoriety that he obviously didn't have before. This is a kid who cannot be passed on. To me, I think he's at least a 2nd-round pick. I would even argue that he could be on the edge of a 1st-round pick. I just think there's just so much ability, and I don't know how he's ever been missed. He's not small. He's 6 foot and about 190 pounds. He fits the NHL frame. Really good skater, elusive, good shiftiness and good mobility. Maybe the defensive game isn't necessarily there, but you can teach that. Just another player to really watch out for going into the 25 draft. And then some other guys I'm going to mention here. Do not draft guys, in my opinion. I talked about Radim Merck. I'm not going to go more into that. Another guy I'm going to mention is a guy to watch out for that I don't think is going to really pan out the way you would expect is Peyton Kettles. Peyton Kettles is a Swift Current Bronco playing in the Western Hockey League. Another guy who's 6'5", 200 pounds. Just doesn't produce much. I think he's a big body. Yes, he can skate decently well. Doesn't have an overly physical element to his game. I just don't think there's a lot of translatable pro traits within him. I find he's lost at times. I don't think he has the hockey IQ to match his frame and his size. I don't think he knows how to utilize his size as well as some would like him to do. There's just a ton of different things you have to look within his game to find reasons to why you want to like him. It's just an interesting thing with him. I just don't know that the skill set really translates into the pro level, at least from what I've seen so far. Could he grow into a really good player? We'll see. Right now, for me, I don't have him as a guy who I would want to draft. Milton Gastrin is another guy, really aggressively ranked in the international rank here. I'm going to go to the first page. They have Milton Gastrin as the 4th best international prospect in this class. I would probably put him closer to like 2025. I just don't see the game that everybody else does. Yes, he produces points. That's great. But in the way he produces points, he's very, he produces a lot of lucky points is what I would like to say with that. Like, he's not a guy who I would consider to be positionally sound. I don't think he's a guy who has overly physical gifts that get him goals. I just think that he gets a lot of opportunities that break the right way towards him. Doesn't have the greatest shot. I don't think he play makes as well as some of these other players that are in this draft. Is he a guy I think who's worthy of getting drafted? Yes, I would absolutely say so. Do I see 1st-round grade for him? Absolutely not. I think he's closer to a 2nd or 3rd round grade. I just don't see that kind of ability out of him. There's some growth to be had in his game. I think he's a guy who will be projectable ultimately at the National Hockey League level, but he's going to take a lot of development. And then you look at another guy who I'm going to mention here is Wojtek Sihar, who, again, aggressively ranked right under Milton Gostrin. Nobody has talked about this kid being a first-round pick. Not even a lot of scouts know who Wojtek Sihar is. So this was a really surprising rank for me. I just didn't see that kind of upside with a guy like Wojtek Sihar. He did play at the World Juniors. I thought he wasn't really that impressive. I think he had a couple of nice moments, but just not enough for me to feel like I could draft him in the first or second round. I just think he's more of a mid-round pick. Really confused by the rank here with Central Scouting. I think it's a real shock to me that he's even remotely in that list. So it's just a surprising pick in my opinion. And then Noah Sansa-Kitala is a guy who is playing in the French League for Marseille. He is I believe he's a Belgian prospect. Was not expecting to see him on the international radar. I'm a huge fan of non-traditional hockey countries and their prospects. I just don't think this kid is even produced at the French level, let alone needing to be ranked. I think he should not have been ranked in this class. I don't think he'll be drafted. It was a very puzzling decision. Granted, he was later, but it's still a really weird decision by Central Scouting to rank him. And then going into like the strengths and weaknesses of the class so far, I would say that the Swedes have a really good class. You look at other guys that are really talented. Arvid Draht's a guy to look at. I think, Anton Frundell, despite the injuries and everything, I think he's got a lot of really good potential to be a very great impact hockey player at the National Hockey League as long as he can stay healthy and strong. You look at other guys that, have some interest, some intrigue to me that I haven't really talked about. Charlton Trethaway is a defenseman for the under-18 program. He seemed to be rated as a second to third round pick. I would probably put him more towards high second round pick. Again, a guy has a bigger body, but I think he's got great mobility and a really good stick. He just is always got himself in proper lanes. I've never really seen him too far out of position. If he is, he corrects himself quickly. Usually when goals happen while he's out there, he's not necessarily the reason why. He's usually, supporting in some way or trying to, he might overcompensate sometimes just to fix for defensive partners' mistakes and things like that. But I think he's a guy who the habits and the traits he has make him an extremely intriguing pro prospect. And there's a lot to like there. Another guy who I think was rated really low internationally is Luka Radojevic. Luka Radojevic's played in 2 World Juniors now, played as a 16-year-old for Slovakia. Didn't have the strongest tournaments, but I still thought it was really effective. I thought he was one of their best breakout defensemen in terms of, getting the pucks out of the zones. I think he's a really good transporter of the puck. Power play, he's able to manage pretty well. Obviously played against really, he was playing with, really superior competition to what, he's seen throughout the year. But there's a lot of different things that really impressed me about Luka Radojevic. I have him probably closer to the second round. Some people even have him in their first. But, for me, I think there's still some warts that have to be fixed in his game, and he's still not a finished product. One other thing I want to mention, too, is there's a lot of overagers that are going to be selected in this year's draft. I think the 07 birth year as a whole for this draft isn't super strong. I think there's really good players in it. I just think that the really dominant players in this draft, outside of Frundell and Misa, are 06 born kids. They're late 06 borns. They've found their opportunities. They've been able to do really impressive things, throughout, their year and different things like that. So it's been interesting to see their growth and watch what they've been able to do. But I just think there's a lot of really impressive overagers that were not selected last year that are going to get their bites at this year's draft. Now going into 30 minutes now on the stream. If you guys have any questions or thoughts on the rankings, feel free to leave them in the chat on the left-hand side. I'm willing to answer them right now. I've given my feedback in terms of what I think of the prospects that are eligible this year. So if you have any questions with regards to certain prospects, with regards to either this year's draft, next year's draft, years beyond, any prodigies you see on the line, again, feel free to leave them on the right-hand side. I'm willing to talk about them and go into more detail about each and every one of them. Like I said here, I'm going to, I shared all the screens here. I'm going to go ahead and go back into, I'm going to talk a little bit about the goaltenders. I haven't really focused on them as much. So let me go to the North American goaltenders. You look at the ranks here. To me, guys who I have particular interest in that are goaltenders, Jack Ivankovic, I think, is a guy, despite the fact he's 5'11", which is really undersized for a goalie, I think he's a guy who, with his skill set, with his ability, I think his reflexes are excellent. I think he's really impressive in his crease coverage. Covers the crease like he's 6'6" instead of 5'11", just really fast on his feet, good mobility, and he's really good at shifting post to post. Some other guys I think to watch. Obviously, there's a lot of bigger goalies that are aggressively ranked here. You look at guys like Louis-Antoine Deneau. He's 6'8". He's had some decent stats in the QMJHL. A lot of teams are going to like him as a low-risk project. You go into some other guys as well. Obviously, Ravensburgen has gotten a lot of discussion just because of him starting in the Western Hockey League for Prince George. A late-born 06 again, like I said. Should be interesting to see what he's able to do. Another guy who I had ranked at one point of the year and then he's kind of steered off for me is Noah Tegelar. He's been really impressive at the Tier 2 junior level. A guy who I think has got a lot of potential, really good skating ability as a goalie, and I think he covers net really well. And then utilizes his big 6'5" frame really. He's listed at 6'3", but I think he's closer to 6'4", 6'5". He really uses his frame very nicely. Not overly mechanical in his movement. I think he's actually very fluid, but he keeps it in really nicely. He keeps his body really stable, really firm, and is really able to puck track very well, which is really good to see. And then, I think the North American class of goalies is a little bit stronger than the European ones this year. But I think the high end of the European ones is where the real impressive thing is. So now I'm going to go into the European guys to watch for goalies. Pyotr Andreyanov, I think, is the top-rated guy. I think he's got a lot of good skill. To me, he's got a first-round grade, in my opinion. I just think he's a really special talent. He's done really impressive stuff going into the rest of this year, and it should be really interesting to see his growth throughout the year. And then Haremstam has been another impressive guy as well that has had a really down year, but overall has been really attractive as a goaltending prospect. So, again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them off to the side. But if I'm getting no questions, if you're watching this later, feel free to leave a comment. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. I would love to have you guys on here and really engaging like Cal just did. And I can talk more about, either this or I can talk more about World Juniors, whatever you guys want to talk about here. So Cal goes on here and he mentions the XL Sending Pelika. He had an unbelievable – or Shane, I'll get to your question after. I'm going to talk about XL Sending Pelika real quick. But yeah, Pelika had an unbelievable tournament. I think the pro upside is there. Could he play in the NHL this spring? I think it's definitely possible. Will he though? Probably not. I think next year is when you're going to look to see him in the Wings lineup. I think he's, they're going to take their time like they always do with their prospects. It seems to have worked with Marco Kasper. I think, guys like Nate Danielson, Carter Mazer, Axel Sandin Pelika, all these guys are going to get their opportunities next year, and they're going to find their ways on this roster. I'm pretty sure they're going to be, really impact players. And I thought Pelika was by far the best defenseman in this tournament. I think even over a guy like Hudson. I really liked Cole Hudson as well. But it's, I think Axel Sandin Pellikka is a guy who is going to be an impact player in the National Hockey League. I really was hesitant to think that way about him until I saw him in this World Juniors and seeing him throughout the season. And he's developed in a way that I was not expecting. So thank you, Cal, for the question. He just said I'm putting my life savings on Pellikka for Calder. So good luck with that, Cal. Rooting for you there. And then Shane Loney's got a question here. He's a Habs fan. Shane, I think you've actually submitted a couple questions before, so welcome back. Tell me about Desnoyers, Bear, Martin, and O'Brien. Hoping the 2 first selections can be used on any of those kids. Caleb Desnoyers, I have him in my personal rank. I have him at, I believe, 10. Caleb Desnoyers is a really talented all-around player. I think he's one of the safer picks in this draft. Offensive upside is impressive, but I think there's more to his game than what he's shown at the QMJHL level. I think of the guys you mentioned in that group of 4, I think to me he's got the most upside. A lot of people like Carter Bear. I need to get more viewings on Carter Bear. I can't rank him fairly right now just because I haven't caught as many games of his as I would like to. So of the things I've seen of Carter Bear, I do like his overall game. I think he's really risen for appropriate reasons. Has been really dominant, in the Western Hockey League level. I think there's just really impressive traits that he exhibits. I think he's overly physical. I think he's the power forward that's really lacking in this draft, in my opinion. Do I see high-end first-round talent out of Bear? No. I think there is in Caleb Desnoyers. For Martin, I'm assuming you're talking about Owen Martin. You can clarify in the comments. But I'll talk about Owen Martin. Owen Martin plays for the Spokane Chiefs as a wing. For Owen Martin, I think there's some growth still in his game. I think to me, of the 4 that you list there, I think he's the most likely to maybe go towards the second round. Just because I think there's some things he's still got to work on. There's no real advanced trait that he has that makes him look like a first-round quality guy, in my opinion. So if anything, he's going to be probably an early second to maybe even mid-second pick. I have him pretty aggressively ranked in the late first round, but it's also because there's certain players in the first round that a lot of people perceive as first-round picks this year that I don't see the same upside with. And Jake O'Brien, I think, is a guy who has always proven that he can score. I think he's the best goal-scoring threat out of the 4 you mentioned in your comment. He's a guy who is really very impressive in terms of what he brings to the table on the power play. He's a guy who gets a ton of power play production. He will be a guy who you want to send in your half wall and get the opportunity to get a shot on net. Not an overly physical guy. I think he still needs to grow a little bit into his body. But overall, a very, an offensive puck hound guy, really impressive in terms of his overall game. I think he needs to work on getting a little more well-rounded. I think he's getting towards that point, and I think he's way more well-rounded than he was when he was 16. But there's a lot to like with them there. I think if you want me to rank the 4, Shane, I would say Desnoyers 1. I would probably put Jake O'Brien 2, Bear 3, Martin 4. Bear has the potential, I think, to be closer to 2. Like I said, I haven't gotten the viewings I would like to. But thank you for the question, Shane. Greatly appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, again, like I said, I'll continue to answer them. Feel free to leave them on this chat on the right-hand side. So there's just, some interesting players to see and watch in this draft. I think there's a lot more potential for some of these guys to really rise up. I'm going to put my personal top 15 up here. Let me share my screen real quick so you guys can see. So going into like my top 15, I will say, for me, these 15, I think are bona fide, really good first round talents, in my opinion. I obviously have Hagens at 1, Michael Misa at 2, and then you got Eklund at 3. Victor Eklund is related to San Jose's William Eklund as well. They're brothers. I think there's a really good player in Victor Eklund. I think I would agree that he is the best international player available, with Anton Frendel being the second best. Cole Rushing, like I said, I talked about him earlier, about his game and his ability. I have a really really strong belief in his game and his upside. Matt Schaefer to me is the best defenseman that's available. I think it's pretty unanimous. Just a really good skater, good offensive ability, good skill, really brings a lot to the table in terms of his game. I think there's just a ton to really like in terms of what he's able to do. Do I see number one defenseman in Matt Schaefer? I wouldn't say that, but I do see a guy who is, a really strong 3 that could be a really good power play merchant. I look at him like a Mike Green. You go into Anton Frundell. Frundell I had initially as my 2 earlier in the year, obviously because of injuries, he's really struggled. This is, I think for Anton, he's a guy who has to just get healthy, has to find his opportunities. And, I hope he gets an opportunity to play in the World Championships. I think him of any prospect in this class could really benefit from a World Championship run in April. Porter Martone, I have at 7. Roger McQueen at 8. Roger McQueen, I haven't talked about him much today, but Roger McQueen is the ultimate project pick, right? He's just a 6'6", 200-pound, really gangly kid who looks like he's 13 years old, but he's a beast on the ice. And when he gets stronger, he's going to find his way to be an even bigger beast on the ice. So he's an ultimate upside pick. There's a ton of potential that may or may not be realized. He's worth the swing for a team that really needs a big end, big offensive engine. I look at a team like Montreal could really use him. You already have a guy like Sevkovsky. If you can match him up with a guy like Roger McQueen and have 2 guys like that in your lineup, especially with the smaller players you have in Caulfield and Suzuki and different players like that, provides a really nice mix for a team like Montreal. Ivan Ryabkin is at 9. He's now just moved to Muskegon. Has gotten a few games here. I forgot to update that in my mock, but he has found his way into North America now and has done a pretty good job so far. I think he's got 3 points in 4 games for the Muskegon Lumberjacks. Has been really good in his own right and has found his way. And the only other 2 I haven't talked about today is Jacob East Wozniak. He's a really high-end shooter, volume guy. Really brings a lot with his overall game. I think he's one of the better shots in this draft. There is some risk in that he is not the most savvy 200-foot player. Can you deal with that and take his skill set and his ability? I think he's very polarizing in that way. I don't look at him like a Cole Eiserman. I think they're different. But I think he's a guy who has his own skill set, knows what he's capable of, but there's some risk involved in taking a guy like him. But I bet on the upside, so I have him in my top 15. And then finally, one guy who I want to mention is Cam Reed, is another really good defenseman. I think this kid's going to be a late riser going into the rest of this draft. Plays for a really good program in Kitchener. He's finding his way at the OHL level. He's seeming to produce a little bit more. I love his skating ability. I think he's like a plus skater in my opinion. Never does anything really dumb with the puck. I think he's super smart in the way he handles his pucks and in the way he handles defensive assignments. I think there's some real growth within his game, and I think he's super projectable. I think he's got really good pro habits already as a 17-year-old. And there's just more to see out of him. I think he's going to be a guy who I think you look at after the draft, maybe he gets into next year and starts to really dominate the OHL, and you wonder why was he not taken in the first round. Personally, he's in my first round. I don't know if he's going to fall in other people's first round. I see him more as a guy that could go into, might be a second round, might be a third round guy. So it just depends on what kind of player you're looking at. But Cam Reed is a guy who I think is going to rise up a lot of boards, and you're going to see a lot of people really impressed by his play by the end of the year. Wow. Okay. So 45 minutes I've gone. Any other questions, please leave them in the chat. If I haven't answered them, I'm going to give maybe a couple more minutes here to see if anybody else has any other questions. If you're watching this on recording, leave comments in the, the video below. Like, you just put a comment on there, just about different prospects, regardless whether it's this year, next year, years prior, whatever. I check pretty often. So, willing to talk more about it. But if you're on here, please do yourself a favor. Please allow your friends to know about the channel. Please, engage in the content like Shane and Cal have today. You know, I'd love to talk more about hockey. I'd love this to not be me talking for 40 minutes where I'm able to answer questions for you guys and really give an honest feedback to this stuff. Really appreciate those that have subscribed to the channel, that are consistently watching. Even if you're in the shadows, please continue to do so. I want to grow this channel as much as I can. You know, obviously you guys have gotten me to 200 subscribers, so I greatly appreciate those that have done so. Keep telling your friends about it. To the Twitch community that I just started, please do yourself a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Again, it's at Hidden Hockey, and that's on all platforms. That's on Twitter. That's on Instagram. That's on YouTube. Obviously, if you're on here, please subscribe to the channel. Please let everybody know about your favorite prospect nerd you just met on the internet. And without further ado, really appreciate you guys being on here. I'm going to do another. I have a couple of highlight videos I'm going to be pushing out here in a few minutes, you know, in a few days here. And then I'm going to do a video on the top 10 international hockey countries to watch out for in the coming decade. I think there's, you know, a lot of interest in that stuff. I don't know when that video will come out. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks it will. Probably closer to a month. We'll see. Just depends on my time between my full-time job and then just doing this on the side and taking care of a couple dogs and, you know, the new house I'm in. So thank you guys as always. Really appreciate you. Sorry for the little bit of a rant at the end. I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to put in questions. And really appreciate you guys being on here. See ya.